Welcome. Good morning. My name is Jeannie Bail, and I'm the Liaison Librarian for the Faculty of Management and also Renaissance College. And my colleague from St. John is here this morning as well. Do you want to give a quick intro, Phil?
Sure. I'm Phil Tabor. I'm the librarian for business in St. John, also English and philosophy, and I'll be co-presenting with Jeannie later in the session today.
Great. So the first segment that we're going to kick off with is on market intelligence. And just want to say, so Phil was up last week, we attended some of the practice sessions for the RBC pitch competition, and we were really thrilled to see how the participants are incorporating market data into their pitches. So that's one application for using market data, but as you'll see, there are lots of different ways that you can use it. And doesn't really matter what your discipline is, there are lots of ways you can avail yourselves of these resources. So why use market intelligence? Again, as I mentioned, the sources can cover a wide range of disciplines. On the right, here's a student, a kinesiology graduate, who started a business called Sweat Club and Sweat Supplements. So whenever you're starting a business, part of developing your business plan is incorporating market data. So I'm sure that when she put together her business plan, she was able to use market data to really make a case for forming her business. Some of the different industries probably touched on, so fitness, personal training, nutrition, supplements. And depending on what your topic is, using market intelligence resources, what it does is it can really demonstrate that you have an informed view of the topic and provide reputable data for your research. And these resources are really useful for career planning as well, and we're going to talk about that in depth a little bit more in the second segment, so using resources, business resources for job hunting. So again, market intelligence, not just for business, really applicable to a wide range of disciplines. So after the session, sort of the goals of, we only have about 15 minutes, so we don't have a lot of time, but hopefully after the session, you'll be able to tell the differences between industry and market research, also learn how to find, so locate trusted industry and market research databases using our library research guides. And this is really important. So if you do need additional help, a lot of these databases they're not, like if you're familiar with searching sort of more text-based databases, like looking for articles, journal articles, news articles. Business databases are a little bit different because you're looking for data and you're looking for reports, and they're often structured much differently than some of our, like, for example, the databases that you would access using ProQuest or EBSCO. So where to go to find additional help after our session. And most importantly, really incorporate the tools and the resources that you learn about today, and not just your program, but also once you graduate as well. And Phil will be talking about sources of free resources. So even after you graduate, you can incorporate this data into either your professional or your personal lives. And this is just a word cloud. This is from one of the business classes that I teach. And as you can see, so using one word, what is your impression of business research? So a lot of times people are maybe intimidated because it is really complex. The databases are set up differently. They're not text. A lot of them aren't text-based. But also I was really happy that people came up with fun as well, because it is a different type of searching. And I find that it's really interesting. And also the resources that we have are so rich and high quality. It's really a privilege to be able to have access to them. So what is market intelligence? So market intelligence, that's kind of an umbrella term that really encompasses two different types of research. So industry research, which is where you're looking at a specific sector, industry, and then market research. So industry research is more about the what, whereas market research is more about the who, so the consumers of either the product or the service that you're marketing via an industry. So just a bit of a refresher, and if you know this already, again, I know this is touched on, especially in a lot of different business courses where you are doing primary research. So primary research is the collection of new data through either market surveys or focus groups or other types of field research. So you're actually conducting the research or the surveys yourself. The focus for today, though, is on secondary research. So secondary, you're gathering pre-existing information, and it can be useful to your purposes and using information that's already been published. So you're not actually doing the research or the collection yourself, you're using these resources that have already been published. So in terms of industry research, so again, data on companies that produce a similar product or service. So they're often classified, industries are classified by different codes, different systems, NAICS, so the North American Industry Classification System is how most industries are organized. SIC code is sort of its predecessor, but some systems or some databases have their own industry classification system. So it kind of depends on which tool or which resource you're using, but in terms of industry, the focus is on companies that are producing similar products or services. And here are just a couple sample reports. So these are two of our resources. So IBIS World. So there's a report here on ice cream production in Canada. I know this is something we'll probably be thinking about in a few months. And then PitchBook, this is a gaming report. And PitchBook has these really great emerging technology analysts who follow particular, especially in the tech industry. So this one is just on gaming. And here's another one. This is Global Plastics and Composites. This is from Frost and Sullivan, another one of our market and industry research providers. So some of the things that you want to think about when you're looking or analyzing, evaluating an industry. So thinking about the phase that industry is in. So whether it's mature or it's emerging. So as we saw, like ice cream, I think that would be defined as a mature industry versus gaming, which is really, especially depending on the type of gaming, more in the emerging industry space. The key players, so who has the biggest market share, and then you can split that different ways, right? So is it biggest market share by revenue, biggest market share by EBITDA? Different ways you can kind of determine those big market players. Growth, so you want to, this is really important, so considering whether the industry you're looking at is shrinking or expanding. So we saw a lot of this during COVID, right? So we saw online shopping just take off, right, to the detriment of bricks and mortar. I mean, bricks and mortar has been sort of suffering a slow decline, but I think, you know, in terms of online shopping, it really exploded during COVID. And I just read CBC, there was a used bookstore in St. John that just closed, and it found during COVID its online business actually was able to sustain the business. So it was more expensive to pay rent and have a sort of a storefront, and it decided to focus mostly on its online presence. Competitors, so comparable companies by size, revenue, strategy, products. And just one thing to keep in mind with the competitors, your competitors, depending on, in terms of the key players and competitors, they might not be the same, because the key players, those would apply to sort of the industry as a whole, whereas when you're looking at your competitors, you're usually looking at a smaller market. So even though, you know, there's some sort of big, really huge, and I'm just thinking about McCain right now, and when it comes to the frozen food industry, maybe if you were in the frozen food industry, you're looking at a smaller market and a smaller, more local market. So McCain wouldn't necessarily be one of your competitors. Trends, so what events are happening. This is really important. Always being sort of keeping abreast of what's happening in the industry and some of the trends that are coming down the pipe. And this is just an example. So in terms of different industries, this is something that you wouldn't traditionally think of as an industry, but as you can see, they can be very niche or focused, or they can be broad. So this is mental health and substance abuse centers in Canada. This is from IBIS World. And you can see sort of how it's broken down, right? So you see a lot of the things that we just talked about in terms of industry outlook. So what's sort of coming, what are the future trends forecast? Major markets, the major companies, right? So the competitive landscape. So all of this information is covered in the report. So that's industry research. And now sort of shifting gears and looking at market research. So with industry research, again, the focus is more on the what. So what types of products or similar services are being produced by a company. Market research is the who. So research that's really looking at potential customers or consumers of that industry or a company. And again, it can be really niche. This is a market research report that was written as part of an MBA program at UPI on Aboriginal tourism and basket weaving on PEI. So I don't know how much like more niche or focused you can get, because not only is it a very particular type of tourism and craft, but also very focused on geographic region. Here's a report on the healthcare consumer, and also this is from Statista. This is Consumer Trends 2022. So what's happening in terms of people's purchasing habits and patterns. So looking at the market, so versus what we looked at for an industry, what we're going to look at for market research is a little bit different. So again, looking at market size, and that's how big, like what is your potential customer group like? Demographics, so looking at just gender, age, income, those are some of the big ones in terms of demographic data. Psychographics, so this is lifestyle, so values, preferences. This is often captured in those consumer trend reports. Geographic, so urban versus rural is a big one when it comes to geography. So what are the habits of a rural consumer versus someone living in one of the big major urban areas? And also trends, so similar to industry, always want to know not just what's happening right now at the moment, but also what the future holds and what the forecast looks like. And this is just an example this is from the Statista report on consumer trends. So you can see this is, this is for the Gen Z consumer. So looking at some of the values of Gen Z consumers, so sustainability, convenience, I love the shoppertainment. So shopping as an experience, personalization, digitalization, and health. So a lot of interest in self-care and wellness. And you see that surfacing even with that example that I had at the beginning with the former kinesiology student who went on to create a company specializing in boutique gyms. So I think, some of these I see when I talk to students around campus too, especially the sustainability. I've noticed a lot of students wearing really interesting t-shirts from places. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And whenever I ask them, did you visit that place or where did you get that shirt? Inevitably, the answer is, oh, I bought it thrift store shopping. In fact, my colleague this morning was talking about shopping via Poshmark, right? So wanting to recycle, especially when it comes to clothing. So just a couple examples here, again, differentiating between industry and market data. And this is used this was from an article that was in the Maritime Edit. So an entrepreneur was talking about a wedding business. And this one right here, so a dedicated and measured entrepreneur, Anderson does her research. So this is the citation to The Knot. So The Knot is a wedding planning site. The Knot predicts an estimated 2.6 million weddings will happen in the US alone for 2022. So just curious, so what do you think this is identifying right here? Is this more industry or market research oriented, this data?
It should be market.
So market. So contrast that with this one right here where it's talking about, this was from the same article about the wedding planning business. So millennial values are different. So couples want to travel, aren't prioritizing $50,000 wedding anymore, focusing on low waste and sustainability. So what do you think now?
That's industry.
So it's actually, any other guesses?
And I think it should be switched
around, right? Yeah. So talking about sort of the market for weddings and that data, that's focusing more on the wedding industry. So that's industry. And this industry data versus the market research, where it's focused again more on the consumer habits. Yeah, and their sentiments. So where can you find these different market and industry resources? So this is just a smattering of a couple of our resources, and we'll talk about those, some of them more in depth when we go with our next segment on job hunting using business resources. You can find all of these market research oriented databases through our research guide. So we have a dedicated research guide focusing on entrepreneurship. So there is this, it's just buffering right now. And buffering. There we go. So if you go to research by subject, there's, you can't really, it's a little fuzzy right now, but we do have an entrepreneurship guide where you can link to market research. And all of the resources that I talked about, you can find them there along with some help. Like there's a help video and also my information, and also Phil's information as well, depending on where you're located. So you can get in touch with one of us if you need additional help. I don't know why that's so fuzzy. So one of the things about industry and market research, and this is a great concept map that was developed by UBC. So a lot of our resources contain overlapping information. So that means you can find, depending on the database, you can find lots of different content within those databases, and there is a lot of overlap. But I really like this concept map because it kind of lays out the major resources. So for example, just looking here at consumer, you can see Passport GMID. So this is the Global Market Information Database. We have access to it as well. Here through UNB Libraries, Forrester, IBIS World. I highlighted some of the ones that we also subscribe to. So CBCA Complete if you're looking for Canadian content. But this is really nice, this way to kind of visualize where to find specific types of data, and also note the relationships between them. So for example, like with overviews, you can find overviews on Passport, but you can also find lots of information on the consumer market research side. So one final thing that I will conclude with, so that's our terms of usage. So these resources are used by industry as well. When I worked in corporate libraries, a lot of the databases that we have access to through UNB Libraries, I also had access to when I worked in corporate libraries. And the difference is that here at UNB, we have an educational license, and it's quite strict in terms of our access, right? So we can only, it's limited to current students, faculty, and staff at UNB. So that means you can't share with, let's say, your friend at Dell. Usage is really restricted to people who are affiliated with the UNB or STU communities. The information within the databases is for individual non-commercial educational and research purposes only. So that means that you can use the data for your course assignments and your projects, but you can't use, for example, if you're doing an internship over the summer and your boss says, can you pull me some data off a pitch book? Our terms, our licensing terms prohibit that type of commercial usage. So really just for educational purposes. And you, I mentioned that. And also, of course, you need to cite where you obtained the data from. And that was one thing when we were watching the pitch practices, people would talk about data, but they wouldn't say the source of the data. So always make sure if you're using data from whether it's an industry or market research database to make sure that you cite where it's from. And in terms of, again, I mentioned that these are often the same resources that I would use in industry, and you can see the costs are quite high. So for something like this report, this is global vehicle leasing and rental market. If you were to, the retail price of this is almost $5,000 US if you were to purchase this through the Frost & Sullivan store. So it's quite pricey. And again, it's a real privilege that we have access to these amazing high quality industry and market research resources. So that's what I'd like to say about market intelligence, and happy to take any questions. There's my contact information again. Thank you. Any questions online?
No questions from online.
We should probably jump right into the next section and take questions at the end.
You want to do that? Okay,
Yes.
we'll do that. We're gonna leap into our next segment, which is on job hunting resources. So we looked at some industry and market research resources. Now we're going to look at some company and also some more industry databases that can be really useful when you're actively job hunting or even just thinking about post-graduation, some companies that you might be interested in working for. And why would you want to use these business resources? Well, they can be really useful, again, if you're just career planning. So if you're identifying some companies where you might be interested and thinking about your values too, right? So matching up your own personal values with perhaps corporate vision or corporate philosophy. There are a lot of, like if you're looking for, I'll be talking about company list, but if you're interested in the environment, making sure that you want to work for a company with a really strong CSR. So sort of corporate, corporate, thank you, corporate social responsibility. Make sure that that's a value of the company that you're looking at, and also for preparing for job interviews. And these tools are more robust than Google and also less biased. Oftentimes, definitely look at the company website if you have interviews lined up, look at the company websites. But the information that you can find in the business databases, it's less biased. So with the company website, there's a definite, it's all about marketing the company and showcasing the company, whereas you can find less biased information if you're using some of these tools. So some of the things that you can find, so looking for example, salary information, executive details, so who makes up the executive team, profile. So with the company profile, looking at, financial. So is the company financially healthy? What are its major, if it has any subsidiaries, or what are its product lines? And then the sort of the broader, the industry information and trend data, which Phil will be talking about. So the first question you want to ask when you're looking for information on a company where you could potentially, let's say you have an interview or you potentially you're interested in working there, want to know whether that company is private or public. And knowing sort of the status of the company will help determine not just the amount of information that's available on the company, but also where you go to look. So matching your information need with the exact resource. So for private companies, a really good resource is Mergent Intellect. And you can see here, one thing to note though, when you're using Mergent Intellect, the default, there's a little box right there for results will only include US companies. So that's the default. So you will have to uncheck that box if you're looking for a Canadian company. So here I looked up McCain Foods. They're headquartered here in New Brunswick and Florenceville. And you can see just at a glance, this is some of the information that you would find on McCain. So financial information, some industry details, who its main executives are, competitors, and also family trees. So again, if there are subsidiaries operating in other areas, or sort of what other businesses the parent is engaged in. And one thing that you'll notice here under the company overview, there is, I mentioned the NAICS code earlier. That's really useful to use as a searching piece of information when you're searching, because you can use the NAICS code in a number of different industry and market research databases. So here, the main NAICS code for McCain is frozen fruit, juice, and vegetable manufacturing. So contrast that with, this is another Mergent product, and this is Mergent Online. So if you're looking for information or a profile in a public company, this is going to be the first place you look. So here I'm doing a quick company search. We subscribe to the international and the US databases. So for international, you should be able to pull up any public Canadian company or any large global public companies. So here, looking at Lululemon. And this is what a profile would look like for Lululemon. And again, you can see a lot of this information is the same, but it's also a lot more robust because it's a public company. So a lot more has been published, including financials. So forced disclosure. So for public companies have to disclose their financials versus private companies do not. Also competitors, news, annual reports, and you can see under each tab, there are subcategories too, right? So for company details, you can get the business history. You can even get information on any property that's owned by the company. Again, subsidiaries. You have the key executives listed here as well. And also analyst research reports. So if you're looking sort of the again, sort of looking at the financial health of the company, looking at the analyst reports would be really useful too. And you find that under company reports. And the last place I want to mention for looking for information on companies is news. So remaining up to date, again, you saw, we talked about it with industry and also with market research. So making sure that you're staying up to date with what's happening, whether it's a company or industry or market. So this is ABI Inform, and this is probably something that, again, this is a more text-based database. So if you're familiar, ProQuest is a data aggregator, so has license arrangements with a lot of different publishers, a lot of different. Here we're looking at newspapers, so a lot of different newspapers. Again, depending on the type of publication, you can also choose magazines or journal articles if you're doing sort of more academic research. But for up-to-date news, and Wall Street Journal is a respected business publication. So again, really good place to look for up-to-the-minute news. You can do a news search here and find out, for example, this right here, Big Four in accounting face SEC investigation. That's really important if you have, let's say, an interview with Deloitte, right? To know if they're, especially if there are any major lawsuits that they're engaged in right now. And last, in terms of company list. So we talked about, if you do have an interview lined up with specific companies, those are great resources to go to look for information on specific companies. But if you're doing some of that career planning where you want to identify or really target potential employers, these are great lists. So Globe and Mail does a company list on top growing companies. Canada's Best Employers, that's produced by Forbes. There's also various awards within Atlantic Business, like Hall of Fame. There's another one, it's the top growing. I can't remember where that one's from. Oh, from Globe and Mail, right? Okay. But yeah, depending on, again, sort of matching your values with the company you want to work for. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Phil to talk about some industry research.
Okay, thank you. So from the perspective of a job hunter, I just want to kind of highlight where the just turn down the echo here. I want to highlight like what the function of a industry resources would be in this context. So if you're applying for jobs, the industry resources, they help you kind of understand where your company fits and what the purpose of the company is, and really help you hopefully kind of impress and wow that company in the context of an interview or application process with an understanding of where the company fits, what the company is doing, how that industry is doing, and come to your interview or bring your application package very specific details about that industry and how it's functioning and expected to grow and so on. And Jeannie talked about the context, the sort of our databases where you only have access to them while you're a student at UNB. And so the time to prepare those application packages using this information is now, while you have the access, while you can use it to impress a potential employer. So I'm going to talk about a couple of key ones. The first is IBIS World, which of course Jeannie did mention in passing in the first section. It's really UNB's key industry database. It's organized around NAICS codes, and if you're applying to a job with J.D. Irving, for example, IBIS World is really what's going to help you you know, understand what's going on in the forestry industry in Canada and be able to talk about whether it's growing, what is its revenue, who are the major players, and what does the industry look like, and see SWOT analyses and other aspects of that industry in a really kind of granular way. And so the use of IBIS World in that context, I think, really useful. So you can also see that in the context of, say, a different industry like landscaping, whether you're applying for a position or whether you're even in kind of an entrepreneurial environment where you're looking to partner with someone to launch a company, it can also have value in that context as well. But if you're oftentimes our MBA students, especially, who many of those watching or attending this session would be, you're looking to apply for either middle or senior management positions at companies of various kinds, or perhaps you're looking to launch a startup of your own. Those are often the most common contexts. And these reports will really help you flesh out your applications, especially when you're looking to work for another company in that regard. Jeannie had this slide up in her first segment, but I thought it was relevant in this as well, because it's important when you're applying to the job to think about that context of, like, what is it you might be able to bring to the company to show that you know something different from other applicants, set yourself apart from those other applicants. Do you know some of these things about the industry you're applying for? It's very common for applicants to jobs, especially in kind of the business world, to come with boilerplate applications that are the same application for each job. You send out 30, 40, 50 applications for the same job and they all look the same. The company is not going to take very much time to consider that application unless there's something about it that shows that you've paid attention to that company and you've paid attention to the industry it works in, and you're bringing details to that application and details to that interview. Really sets you apart in a really important way from other applicants. And so asking yourself some of these questions: is this industry emerging or mature? What's its market share? Is it shrinking, expanding? What are the different size companies in that industry and how are they functioning? What's happening now in that industry and what's expected to happen in the future? These are all things that very few job applicants bring to their applications or bring to their interview. And if you bring even some of those details, you are going to absolutely wow the people who are interviewing you. Really give yourself a leg up in an important way. The other database I really wanted to mention is Statista, and I'm going to talk about some other data sources when we get to our sort of free segment. But Statista is an essential database. Most business students are familiar with it in the context of providing really useful kind of way into Stats Canada data and other forms of data that are really very user-friendly. But Statista can also be used to give you a little bit more local granular data about the employment ecosystem in Canada or regions of Canada. So you can see here that we've got a few data points sort of towards the bottom here in the search result. Number of jobs in New Brunswick in 2021 broken down by NAICS category. So you can see industry by industry where the employment is. In terms of your own strategy, what kinds of companies are likely to be out there? Like, how do I tailor my interests? Can I stay in New Brunswick working in a particular sector? Are there a lot of companies? Are there fewer companies? What, you can make those judgments for yourself. Number of employed people in New Brunswick in Canada by industry, same idea. And the third one here, of course, number of employees in the forestry and logging industry in Canada by region. So you can see, again, if you're considering J.D. Irving or some of its local competitors, you can think to yourself, how many people are actually employed in that industry? Of course, you're going to know that many of those employees are at the sort of operational level. So if you're an MBA student thinking, I'm interested in sort of middle management, working my way towards senior management, J.D. Irving, how many positions are there really? How likely is it? And you'll have a sense, again, of the pool of candidates you're pitting yourself against. And those specific details that I've mentioned just a minute ago become even more important when you can see that really it's a sort of a small pool of available positions, a small pool of employees. And if you can set yourself ahead of those people, you can bring some of this data to your applications and to your interviews as well, to really clearly and crisply explain to the interviewee or to the interviewer what you know. And so this is just what those graphs look like. The Statista data is really very simple. The IBIS World reports are detailed. They contain a lot. A Statista piece of data is usually just a single chart, a single graph. And so you can come just with a very simple little clip, little snippet of information to your job interview, to your application. I probably wouldn't say to include a graph like this in an application package. That's a little extra. You don't want to kind of be, but to be able to kind of take some of the number out of it, right, and show that you understand that number, that there's value in that. Wait, here we are. And same thing here. Again, like, don't actually bring the chart to your application package, but to understand in this case, what the level of employment is by industry in different sectors and runs with that, it's very helpful, I think, in terms of assessing. So there are some other industry databases that might be helpful. I'm not going to talk about them in any detail today because we just don't have time for that. But Frost & Sullivan, BCC Research, and Forrester Research, in my opinion, are the kind of other three databases that are particularly useful when it comes to job applications. IBIS World, the one I mentioned at the beginning, it really is focused on traditional stable industries that can be defined by a NAICS code. These other three databases, their focus is often on emerging and disruptive industry sectors. And so you may not find something in IBIS World, especially if you're entering an industry that's either doesn't really have a clear NAICS identifier, or a company that sits between NAICS codes in a kind of puzzling way. Something that's being heavily disrupted by emerging technology right now. These databases may have reports that would give you the same kind of detail that you find in an IBIS World report, but just with a focus on some of those high-tech sectors. So you can see here just what these databases cover. Much of it is in biotech, pharmaceuticals, IT, cybersecurity, those sorts of things. That's really what these databases do. And there, I would say, are other three key industry reports. So you want to bring something neat to a job application or to an interview context, I would encourage you to check them as well. I don't know, Jeannie, if you had anything you want to sum up here.
Oh, for the things to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just a sort of the takeaways for.
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, that'd be great. Yeah.
If you don't mind, could you just back up the last slide? Just wanted to,
Sure.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. This.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
Excuse me, it is recorded? It has been recorded?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Oh, okay.
And these are also, I mentioned the earlier presentation, the entrepreneurship, the research guide. So these are on the market research guide.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can find it there. So in terms of things to remember when you are job hunting, again, sort of going, when you do, you want to use these valuable resources that you have access to while you're here at UNB. But doing pre-search, it never, don't shy away. Definitely check out the corporate website. Maybe do a quick Google or Wikipedia search to just get some basics on the company that you might be interviewing with, or the industry you're exploring. Read the news. It's really important to, especially when you're going to an interview, they're going to ask you if you have any questions, right? So news is a great way to pull out some really timely, for you to formulate some really timely questions on what's currently facing either the company or the industry that company falls into. Always pull a company profile. It'll impress the team that's interviewing you because it'll show that you're well informed and you've also done your research on the company. You wouldn't believe how many people show up for interviews without having done any preliminary research on the company that they're actually interviewing with. So this will immediately, as Phil mentioned, set you apart from the competition when it comes to job searching. And really pay attention to the values and the mission of the company too, and its leadership team, right? Because it's so important in terms of leadership, sort of setting the tone for the company. So look at the leadership that's in place at the company. Industry, so again, major trends, the forecast. The forecast is really important because an industry that's doing well today might not be doing well tomorrow. So I want to look at the sort of the long term and what's on the horizon.
Yeah, it's not just, I suppose, it's not just about being an appealing candidate. It's also about protecting yourself, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
Are you entering a healthy industry? Are you entering an industry that's stagnating?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So for example, like paper and pulp, right? That's an industry where I think we've seen a lot of closures in the past, I'd say, I don't know, a decade. So again, you don't want to, that's one of the factors that you want to weigh, sort of what's the future of the industry that you're planning to enter. And also reflect. So what have you learned? What do the growth opportunities like? Again, and that relates to whether the business is growing or contracting. branch offices. Maybe you're, thinking about maybe moving abroad in a few years. So think about future opportunities with that particular company. And you'll see that again, sort of looking at the company information under subsidiaries. Does it have a branch or a subsidiary based in another country where you might want to work? All of this is stuff that you want to sort of think about and reflect and really examine the big picture before you accept an offer. That's all. Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Part 2, part 3. So my slides for this section are going to be brief because I really want to actually just use some of our databases quickly to show you what we have. The purpose of this section is to recognize that once you are no longer a UNB student, you no longer have access to many of our databases. And I want to make the point that today that the skills that most of you have learned in navigating and using those databases, the skills you'll be able to apply to job search contexts before you leave, can be transferred to a number of other databases. In particular, I'm going to point out the link between Statista and Stats Canada. It's really quite close. Sometimes it's a matter of usability. It is arguably the case that our databases bring very clear value adds in terms of reports and so on in the peer-reviewed material. But the databases that we subscribe to are often just more usable in a certain way. And that's certainly true of some of the data and statistics. So why will you need this? Of course, I just said you won't have access, but there's a variety of good tools. And some of these will help you as an employee, some as an entrepreneur. So we have the library website has a section specifically focused on freely available tools. And really that's going to be the roadmap for this segment of the presentation. I'm going to use this. I'll bring it up in a second. I've got a QR code here for those both live and online and those watching the recording. You can, take a second, and this is just going to take you to that page I just showed, which is what we're going to use as a kind of our core spot today. But you'll see how I navigate to it in a second as we go through the library's website. So so I'll let our 2 in-person folks get that, and we'll just navigate directly to the library's website. And I'll just show you the pathway for those who may not have quite kept up to me there. So let's see if I can use Jeannie's money. Great. Okay, so we're on the library's website, which I'll make just slightly bigger here. And so this lives in the company and industry guide for the library's website. So from the catalog search, we're just going to scroll, not scroll down that far. We're going to scroll down just a whisker to the research guide section here. And in the research guide section, of course, we have a drop down that contains all of the disciplines taught at UNB. Business is, of course, very conveniently at the top. It's an alphabetical list. So we'll go to the business landing page. And from the business landing page, there's a series of detailed guides here on the left-hand side. We're going to find ourselves in the company and industry information guide. And this is where that QR code took us earlier for those who used that pathway instead. So this guide contains a variety of the paid databases that UNB has, but there's also, I want to highlight, and this is our roadmap today, on the very end of these tabs, a tab that's called Free Internet Sites. And this gathers together a whole variety of government pages, industry pages, and so forth that are really quite valuable, especially after you've lost your access. You are never going to lose your access to this page. This page itself, the guides themselves, will always be available to you even after you're no longer a UNB student. It's just our subscribed databases. So this page, of course, will be a really good roadmap for you if you choose to make use of this, come back to it for various purposes, which is why I wanted to use it today. I'm only going to talk about a few of these. I'd had more in mind, but we're a little short on time. So I'm just going to highlight a few key ones. The main one is Stats Canada, right? So you'll see in the Canada section, Statistics Canada is here at the bottom. And I'm just going to pop open the Stats Canada page. Now, for those of you who have made good use of Statista for various kinds of data, I showed a couple of use cases just a minute ago about what Statista can show you. Much of that data is sourced through Statistics Canada. It's just that Statista is a much more searchable interface and it looks prettier. But you can use Stats Canada in many contexts to get the same kind of information It's just that Statistics Canada is a little bit difficult to use. In fact, the search interface of Stats Canada is notoriously bad. Like, it's just, I would describe it as sort of nightmarish to navigate. But there's quite a simple workaround, which is just to do a Google site search of Stats Canada instead of searching directly in Stats Canada itself. So for those of you who don't know what that is, I wanted to just very quickly show it. So this is a way of searching Google that you may not know, but if there's a home URL that you want to be able to search within, you can go to a Google search, and we're just gonna go. You can go to Google search and type in, like so, site and the URL that you want. So I've got statscan.gc.ca, which is kind of the home URL for Stats Canada, right? And then I can search key terms that I want to find reports on inside of Stats Canada, whether that's something about the agriculture industry, the forestry industry, employees in certain industry, whatever you might want. So let's say, for example, forestry industry. And what we're going to get is a, let's see, where's our industry? So yes, here we go. So we're going to get some of the tables from Stats Canada will be more readily available to us this way, using the site search. This is actually not a good example.
That's interesting though, because it just brought up all the NAICS codes, the corresponding NAICS codes with the industry. So those codes, once you have them again, you can search like IBIS World using the NAICS code.
Yeah. Yeah, and I personally do not use the Stats Canada search very much. I instead will do the Google site search like so. Now, one of the downfalls, and this is the primary downfall of freely available information, is that it frequently is not as current. It simply is not as current. This is a pretty good one, 2022, December 2022, quite recent actually. Most of the StatsCan data, not all, but much of it, comes from two surveys, the census and the Census of Agriculture. And those are conducted every 5 years, and then the data is released 2 years later. So from a business perspective, that can be a little bit dated. I mean, it's just hard to avoid that when it's freely available information. Stats Canada also does run separate surveys in the intervening time that are more focused and specific, and sometimes those are more current. They'll be more constrained in terms of their content. So you will sometimes see more current data than this. And this will tell us what the source of this is if we're looking for it. Let's see, it tells which survey. So this is the annual survey of manufacturing and logging industry. So we could actually look at the entire survey if we wanted to, and it is more current than the census data. So that's nice. Some of the industry stuff is annual, and that's nice. But Stats Canada is the primary source of data for Canadian type things. If we're thinking like international, there are a number of other places, and they're all noted in this guide as well, that are really quite useful. So for example, data.gov for American content. There's a number of international ones in particular. The EU's industry sectors overview, very good, similar kind of thing. And the Statistics Division of the United Nations and the World Bank Open Knowledge Repository all contain like data about industry at those different levels, like international, American, whatever. And some, they're actually arguably easier to use than Stats Canada. I think of all these tools, Stats Canada is the worst. So if you can figure out Stats Canada, you'll be in good shape. What else did I want to talk about? In terms of thinking about this, some of these things are here. But one of the questions when you're doing this freely available searching, much of it's in this page, and I'm always trying to add more. But one thing you should always ask yourself is, what organization might be interested in this topic? So oftentimes there will be an industry association that will pertain to anything. And you can frequently just Google something along the lines of, so for example, biotech. So biotechnology industry Canada, for example, and now industry association, sorry, Canada. And so typically we'll find something like Biotech Canada, which is a kind of like umbrella organization for Canada. And those associations will have member directories telling you what companies are working in that field. They may have press releases and news releases talking about what's happening in that industry in Canada. And I can just swap out Canada for another jurisdiction and we'll see the same idea. So I can swap in European Union, and then we'll see that there are a couple organizations, including the Europa.eu has a segment of the European Commission connected to the biotechnology industry, and there's a couple of others as well. Same thing with the United States. So I strongly encourage you to always check for industry association websites. It's a really good entry point to data about the industry. Now, remembering, Jeannie said this at the beginning, remembering that these organization websites often have kind of a boosterism aspect, like they want what they present on their website is going to be like lauding and singing the praises of their industry and arguing in various ways for its adoption or expansion. And that's just something to bear in mind when you're looking at them. You're not likely to find criticism of that industry on the association websites, and that's fine. As long as you go in with that lens, that's totally fine. Just in the context of neutrality and bias, coming back to our page, there's a range here of corporate and government sources of information. In general, the corporate and association type websites are going to have a stronger bias. It's just the case that they will. And again, if you go in with your eyes open, you can make very good use of the data they provide about their industry, despite that. In terms of bias in the government websites, it's worth considering that, at least and this is my view, I would argue that the more international the organization, the less bias you're likely to see. Whereas the more sort of local government you get, the more you'll see. So some of these here, for example, we have a few from New Brunswick in the Canada section, like the Opportunities New Brunswick, ACOA are here. And these are kind of local regional government organizations whose purpose is to boost private industry. And because they are trying to get industry to locate in New Brunswick and provide funding to grow industries in New Brunswick, they really have what I view to be more of a boosterism quality, whereas the United Nations, the European Commission, the World Bank, international organizations who aren't trying to get businesses to do something in a certain place. Their data, their reports, the World Bank has really wonderful reports actually that are linked from the World Bank entry here. They'll be more neutral in their tone. And so when an international report will do for your purpose, I recommend those. But sometimes you're interested in how is the industry doing in New Brunswick? How is the industry doing in Canada? So as long as you kind of embrace the nature of the bias, then you'll be fine. So that's really all we have time for. It's really, I think that's what I wanted to say up there, and take time for questions. I can expand on this or the other segments in our presentation if there are any questions.
This was really great. You'd answered one of the questions I was going to ask, which was about access after you leave as a student. So much of this information is really great. But just to ask the extent, so just circle back to yesterday, I was doing some research work and I went to SAGE, and SAGE has several different types of SAGE. And the one I was looking for, I could see New Brunswick had access, but I couldn't get the text, the research text. So do we have limitations on some of the resources that are available to us?
Sometimes, like we will often subscribe to packages, but in a situation like that, it's always prudent to ask a librarian or a library staff person, because sometimes there are two possible scenarios usually. One is that you could just be in an internet ecosystem where you're accidentally not being proxied through to UNB's subscribed resource. So we may have the subscription to that, and you're just hitting a roadblock getting to it. The other possibility is that it's a package we don't subscribe to. But I would always say just run it past a library staff person, and they'll help you determine which it is. And if it's a package we don't subscribe to, most of the time we can procure, especially articles or book chapters through document delivery. Get it and bring it in from another university that does subscribe to it. Yeah.
And that's free too. So we're a document delivery service. So if it's sounds like it was a journal article that you're doing too.
Yeah.
If it's
very
a
rare
yeah.
to get those, so.
And the turnaround time is really good too. Like usually with digital delivery, it can be like within 24 hours.
I definitely pull it up.
Yeah, we can look at that before you go today.
In Sage, much like we talked about ProQuest and EBSCO, so it's a publisher that aggregates a bunch of different titles. So that's why maybe you can access one title via the Sage platform because we subscribe to it, but we might not subscribe to every single title depending on
Gotcha.
which packages we subscribe to.
Any online questions, Jeannie?
We just have one question about sharing your slides afterwards, so we can follow up after to see if you're comfortable doing that. And we can get in touch with participant by email.
And it'll be recorded. The recording will be posted.
And the recording will be available, shortly after.
Ask a question.
Sure.
So something I've flirted with trying to find so far in business resources, and that you didn't really talk about, probably because I don't know if it was purpose for your talk or not. I'd really like to know if there's a way to find out how much money some of these companies contribute to lobbying and those kinds of things. So like lobbying, think tanks, those kinds of endeavors. And I've kind of poked around a little bit and found some like aggregated stuff, but I wonder just how much of that stuff is actually available and where I might look for it. Not to ask you a really hard question at the end of a talk.
I mean, I don't know that I know the answer to that, but I have a couple ideas about how to figure it out. I know that there is a lobbying registry that at least the Canadian federal government maintains, but I don't know if that tells us anything other than who lobbies and when.
Yeah, I am more interested in the US perspective.
The US perspective.
Yeah, also ESG, so environmental and social governance, a lot of that data. Looking at looking at the investments that a company is making, but also I haven't looked in terms of lobbying, but I'm thinking that maybe related to ESG, there would be some disclosures in terms of lobbying. That's a really good question, though. That's never.
If you're interested in the spend, like the dollars.
I mean, it'd be nice.
Yeah.
I'm looking for whatever I can get just to.
So both the House and the Senate have a lobbying disclosure kind of segment. I'm not exactly sure what's on them. It's clear enough. It's clear that the Senate's kind of a little more refined and seems to have like registrations and activity reports. So at least that would tell you something likely about who is lobbying and when. In terms of the dollar figure, that I'm less certain about. I probably couldn't come up with that in the spot.
Would you mind?
No, but that's really great to know. Actually,
Yeah,
thank you.
is it? Can you pull up one of those? Like, yeah, what does the search thing look like?
Let's see, name or ID. So I wonder what we need to know. Registered client and lobbyist. What the difference? So the lobbyist would be the individual who would lobby. The client is the part of the company. So probably we could try maybe a company name and see if DuPont, for example. DuPont's like the big chemical company.
There's money. I mean, it reported.
Yes, there we go.
Nice.
Okay, this
Thank
actually,
you.
yes, this is probably what you're looking for, Rochelle.
This has been bugging me for months. It's nothing urgent, but it's something
Yes,
that will be good to have.
interesting. In the context of our presentation today, I mean, it is actually relevant because we mentioned corporate social responsibility at the beginning, and if you're a job applicant who wants to apply to companies that behave in certain ways in relationship to public dollars, in relationship to public policy, bad actors like DuPont who like love to spill chemicals and pretend that they didn't, like maybe you want to know what their political activity is as a part of your assessment of like what kind of company you want to work for, right? So there's value in that for sure. That's an interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you. This is excellent.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Lovely.
Okay.
And we'll call her quits. Thanks everybody so much for your time.
Thank you.